Good evening, this is Brown at Eye of Brown, and tonight we are going to be talking about Deathlok, the miniseries from 1990. So the character of Deathlok was originally created in the 1970s, and it was in a comic book series called Astonishing Tales, and it told the story of a soldier named Luther Manning who was killed in the line of duty but found himself brought back to life as a sort of, decaying, zombified cyborg named Deathlok, who was a one-man army in a rather dystopian future. And also, this dystopian future happened to be the then future of the 1980s. So it was a pretty cool story. I remember, my dad had a couple of issues from Astonishing Tales, and eventually, we ended up getting like this big, book that collected the whole, storyline, and it was pretty neat. Yeah, dated in some respects, but at the same time, there was a lot of cutting edge stuff. Especially when it came to, how cyborgs were depicted, and you look at, the character of Deathlok, which was done in the 1970s, and then you see other, cyborg creations that came after that. You see like, Cyborg from the Teen Titans. You see RoboCop, you see the Terminator, just all these other characters, and you look at Deathlok's story, and then you see some of these other characters, and you know that there was some influence, from Deathlok, at some point. But it was a pretty cool series, and there were even times where Luther Manning would find himself in our reality, aka the mainstream Marvel universe. He'd go on adventures with Captain America or the Thing or Spider-Man, and then he'd find himself back in his own reality. But yeah, it was mainly because of these excursions into our reality that within our reality, the mainstream Marvel universe, the evil corporation, Roxxon, which is basically the Marvel Universe version of OCP, the evil corporation from RoboCop. Roxxon was able to get data on the Deathlok cyborg. Even though it was from another reality, they were able to get data from it, and they had just enough data to where they're able to reverse engineer and create their own Deathlok cyborg. And so fast forward to 1990, and we have the new, the all new second Deathlok cyborg. And even though the miniseries here is the focus of the review, the story actually begins in issue 62 of Marvel Comics Presents. So this particular comic book was sort of an anthology series. Each individual issue would have 4 8-page stories. Sometimes the stories were multi-parters, sometimes they were standalone stories. And in this case, the introduction of the new Deathlok cyborg was a standalone story. And check this out real quick. The cover format was usually on the front and back, it would combine into one big picture. But look right here, that's the new Deathlok cyborg, and the cover art was by Paul Ryan. But the story in which the new Deathlok cyborg is introduced is called Test Run, and it was written by Dwayne McDuffie and Gregory Wright, and it was illustrated by Jackson Guice, very good artist. And so the story, begins with a division of Roxxon called Cybertech, and a guy named Harlan Riker is in charge of Cybertech, and he's the one who's in charge of putting this new Deathlok cyborg through its paces. And they needed a volunteer, to make up the organic components of this Deathlok cyborg, and they got a volunteer in a soldier by the name of John Kelly, who was a career soldier, loyal to flag and country, but he also had a problematic family life, and after after his wife and kids left him, or I should say wife and kid left him, he ended up saying, hey, I've got nothing to lose, I'll volunteer for this experiment. And so his body is used for the organic components of the Deathlok cyborg. And so Harlan Riker and his scientific team has John Kelly in the Deathlok as the Deathlok cyborg going through a training exercise, and things seem to be going well at first, and the body, it can lift up to 85 tons, and it also is faster, far faster than a human can run. And it can also see on various spectrums, with its mechanical eyes. But it can also hack into, I guess you could say, computers, and surf the internet. I mean, but this being 1990, I mean, this is something that's totally cutting edge. But he also has an onboard computer, which basically he's supposed to work with, and they're supposed to work together to complete military exercises. But unfortunately, Kelly proves to be too independent. Excuse me. Too independent, for the computer. He clashes with the computer in terms of what directions to take, and to a point where the computer ends up taking over the Deathlok body, in order to complete the training exercises by itself. And in the process, John Kelly's brain ends up being fried. And so after the exercise is complete, Riker has his scientific team bring the Deathlok cyborg back in so they can go over it and find out what went wrong, and also hopefully find a new volunteer. And that's where the miniseries begins. And we're introduced to the character of Michael Collins, who is a scientist that works with Cybertech. Excuse me, itchy throat, sorry. But he works in the prosthetic limb department, and he's been working in that department because he wants to help people. He wants to give people who have lost limbs in horrific accidents. He wants to give them an opportunity to function in society. And as well as to enjoy life. But he also he's a happily married family man. He has a wife named Tracy, and they have a wonderful son named Nick. And they just have a good life together. And Cybertech's been able to give them many opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise, financially speaking. But Michael is also a pacifist, and he makes a point to not get involved with any projects that say have warfare in mind. But he one day learns that a lot of his work is going towards the Deathlok project, and that's a project I initially had no idea about. But once it's brought to his attention what his work's really going towards, that's when he finds out about the Deathlok cyborg. And so he makes the mistake of bringing this to the attention of Harlan Riker, because he and Riker were friends, but it turns out it was a very one-sided friendship, and he didn't even know it. Riker played him, and once Riker realizes that Michael Collins isn't going to be playing ball anymore, he knocks him out. He tranquilizes him, and calls us scientific team up and says, "Hey, we got a volunteer." And so his brain goes into the Deathlok body, and Michael Collins is in for a rude awakening, literally. Like, he wakes up and finds himself in somewhere in South America, and he's in the process of using all this advanced weaponry to kill people, to kill soldiers, mind you, but still people. And he freaks out. He's like, what's going on? Where am I? How did I get here? Why am I killing all these people? And that's when he finds out that, oh my god, they put me in the Deathlok cyborg. I'm a monster. And he's able to assert just enough control to where he's able to interact with the onboard computer. And the two of them, they sort of come to an understanding, the computer and Michael Collins, and he realizes that, okay, the computer has objectives it needs to follow, but at the same time, I can influence it, I can control it. And that's when he tries to implement a no killing program into the Deathlok cyborg. And so at that point, he starts finding out more. It's like, okay, how did this happen? Who did this to me? And he realizes that, courtesy of his computer, he realizes that Harlan Riker, was the one who did it. And so, at first, he's despondent, he's borderline suicidal, and especially after having tried to, go and make contact with his wife. She sees this sort of zombified cyborg, calling her name, and she freaks out. And so after that happens, he initially, is going to, kill himself, because, he feels like he, can't go back to his family, and, he's stuck in the body of a monster, and killing people against his will, but he talks to his son first, through, and he's able to use the Deathlok technology to, get access to, a video game that his son's playing. And he pretends that he's a program that, that he left for his son, and he talks to him and tries to pass on some final advice. And he says, hey, when your father programmed me, he made sure to, have me in place to, once you found me, to remind you of everything that your father taught you, and that your father does love you, or something along those lines. And so, his son, mind you, his son thinks that, he's either dead or, injured somewhere. And so he's asking, do you know when my dad's coming back? And, Michael can only tell him that, I don't know when your father's coming back, but, he does love you. He wanted me to tell you that. And so after that conversation, he, changes his mind about, committing suicide. He finds a new purpose, because he realizes that, there is still life, and he has an obligation, to right the wrongs that, Cybertech did. And so he goes on a mission to find out what their agenda is and how to stop them. And hopefully in the process, find a way to, come back to his family. So this was actually a pretty cool mini-series. Considering that this was, put out in the 90s, the 90s, were famous for, amongst other things, having like really grim and gritty characters, or at the very least, characters tended to be a lot more, I guess, harsh and violent when it came to fighting crime. There were characters like Wolverine, Punisher, Ghost Rider, and all those guys, when it came to going up against evildoers, usually quite a bit of blood was spilled and bones were broken. And so, I mean, nothing against those characters. I mean, I think they're all, good characters, in good when they're in good hands. But Deathlok is definitely a character who stands out from them, because while he looks like, you look at him here, and I mean, he's a zombified, cyborg. And I mean, he looks like a character who will shoot first and ask questions later, but with the twist of the cyborg having the brain of a pacifist, you get this character who is in a machine that's built for war, but he's doing everything he can to not kill. And so it's one of those deals where it could have just been a good idea, but what could have fizzled out as with excuse me, poor execution. But instead, though, the writers, Dwayne McDuffie and Gregory Wright, they team up to tell a believable story here as far as the Marvel comics go. Because you have Michael Collins. I mean, you get to know him as a character, both before, when he's, ordinary, happy family man, and after, when he's, forced into the Deathlok cyborg. But you see, just how strong-willed he is and how determined he is to try and make things right. And, you see just how good of a man he is as well, because, I mean, of course, I mean, he definitely, he's a good family man. He cares, he loves his wife and son, but he also has, a strong, sense of, morality, in a sense that, he does whatever he can to, protect the innocent. Like, he initially doesn't go out of his way to be a hero, but, whenever he sees, someone, who's, say, getting assaulted on the streets or something like that, he doesn't just stand by. Like, he goes in and helps the innocent out. And I mean, that's how he met his friend Jesus. And he and Jesus is a character who comes into play because Deathlok, he ends up on Coney Island, when he's trying to find a new purpose in life. But he finds, he literally finds Jesus, who was kind of a special effects artist who works on Coney Island. But he saves Jesus from being assaulted by these street punks, and in gratitude, Jesus, he after hearing Deathlok's story, he ends up giving Deathlok a place to live, and and the two of them actually end up becoming really good friends. And Jesus is a guy who he's sort of like a he has sort of this grumbling jerk initially, but he also has a heart of gold, and he's a very loyal friend. You do right by him, he'll do right by you. And he sort of acts as a sounding board with Deathlok. And I like the dynamic that the two had. And also, it was just really cool that he was a special effects artist, because you see all these things that he's created in his home, like all these monster heads, and I thought that was pretty cool. Nice visual. But yeah, so yeah, just as far as character development goes, it was pretty good. I mean, I like the twist of the pacifist and in the body of a killing machine, but nonetheless, he's determined to not let the body be what defines him. I mean, he's still the man at heart, he's still the man that he was, and granted, there'll be times where he has to fight, but he also makes a point to fight only when it's absolutely necessary. Like, he'll do everything he can to try and talk things out, before, okay, let's fight, And I really liked that. I mean, that really stood out, especially for the time that this book was written in. Also, I like the art style in the book. I mean, let me be a little more specific. The two artists that worked on this book, Jackson Guice, he did the artwork for the first two issues, and then Denise Cowan did the artwork for issues 3 and 4, and they're two very different art styles. I mean, Jackson Guice, his work's always been very clean, very, I guess, realistic. Just to give you an example here, like he's always been really good at drawing people. I mean, it looks like, a family having a conversation. And then when it gets to, I guess, the more superhero or comic book stuff, a really nice shot of Deathlok coming into action there. But yeah, his work's always been very, clean, very easily defined. But whether it be just ordinary family discussions or all-out action scenes, and I've always liked his work. Even going back to when he was working on Superman in Action Comics. But you take that artwork though, and for the first 2 issues, and then it switches over to Denise Cowan, and the artwork becomes a lot more gritty and dirty looking. Case in point, like right here, there's almost kind of a Klaus Janson vibe. Klaus Janson was someone who, he was always good at drawing, I guess mundane stuff, but he always had a very grimy aesthetic to his characters. And you look right here, you see how the shading is. So, 2 very different art styles. One clear and defined, and the other sort of rough around the edges, but they both work rather well. And I do kind of wish that Jackson Guice had been, the artist for all 4 of these issues in the miniseries. Just because, I mean, personally, of the 2, I actually prefer Guice's artwork over Cowan's art. But at the same time, Cowan, his work, I mean, it works on its own level. I guess, when it gets to morally gray areas in the story, like say when Nick Fury gets involved, Shield gets involved, and anytime those guys get involved, you got espionage, spy stuff. And that's always when gray area comes into play. And so when that happens, that's when Denise Cowan's doing the art. And I guess in that sense, it actually works out rather well because, I mean, hey, nitty gritty stuff, espionage. And so that's when, the nitty gritty artist comes into play. But anyway, though, Denise Cowan actually would go on to be the regular artist for the ongoing Deathlok series after the miniseries. And so the art styles both work rather well, but I do wish that Jackson Guice had been the artist for all 4 of the issues of the miniseries, and Denise Cowan, being introduced and as the artist in the ongoing series. But as it is, I mean, the art works rather well. As far as the villains go, some people will probably consider it cliche that the evil is basically coming from another big corporation that runs everything, like OCP and RoboCop. But Harlan Riker, though, he manages to be a pretty good villain, and he strikes me. He kind of reminded me of Jason Wynn, Spawn's enemy, from Image Comics. And he's someone who he's very I guess you could say he's kind of a sociopath, because he can pretend like he's your friend and have you fooled, but then the next minute stab you in the back. But very, very sociopathic individual. And you see just, how, and ruthless he is in attaining his goals. And one of the other things that you see in the later issues of the miniseries is just that, there's a lot of dirty politics going on, like not only just with other businesses, but in other countries. And, that's where, when they end up going to Japan and, in the later issues, and, on one hand, Harlan Riker is trying to screw over Japanese clientele, for technology and weapons, but on the other hand, the Japanese clientele, they've got their own agendas, and, it's like you see everyone has an agenda here. And even, but I also liked how, when it came to, say, the corporate politics, you see how, even people, I guess you could say, who are on the antagonist side, there are good people, that happen to unfortunately be stuck on the wrong side. I mean, you have a couple of scientists who, were friends with Michael Collins, and one of them, who was working with Cybertech, tries to help him out, after, he finds out that, he's been turned into a cyborg. I mean, he tries to help him out against, Harlan Riker and his minions. But then also, as far as the Japanese connection goes, you have the character of Sunfire, who was a Japanese mutant who, for a brief amount of time was with the X-Men. But he's sort of like a guardian of Japan, and as well, and in his civilian identity, he's the sort of like this big business entrepreneur. But anyway, though, so he's a patriot, and he's trying to do right by his country. But there are other people who, they have their own agenda, to where they're wanting to basically start World War III, with America, and it's sort of like a complex revenge scheme. And Harlan Riker's actions, just sort of play into all that. And so, it was fascinating, going from a, sort of revenge story into, corporate politics story, and, I liked that, because it's like both types of stories, in this miniseries, they sort of combined together and worked rather well. And you see, Michael Collins, being forced along into this because, he's sort of like his own agent. I mean, he and his computer are having to work together, and, any help they get from anyone else is limited. And so, when he's forced to go along, with Harlan Riker, on these, corporate, espionage, missions, it's one of those things where, Riker is just dangling the carrot in front of him, saying, hey, I'm the only one who can get you back into your human body, to where you'll actually be Michael Collins again, but you have to do what I say. And so it's a rather uneasy, alliance between the two. And, and I liked seeing how, Michael Collins was dealing with that, because on one hand, he's dealing with Harlan Riker, and then on the other hand, he's dealing with, all these other corrupt individuals, that are trying to, basically screw everyone. And then you have, some of the more morally ambiguous people, so, could be good, could be bad, like Nick Fury or Sunfire. And Michael Collins is just, like, hey, I'm just trying to, get my body back, so I can, go back to my wife and kid, but I liked seeing him adapt to the situation. But yeah, it was a pretty cool miniseries. And I liked the fact that, the villains in the book, like, they were believable for, what this book was. I mean, as far as, like, corporate villainy, and the superpowered villain that they had was a guy who, he was a mercenary who had the ability to take over machinery, and he proved to be a good threat to Deathlok. But so yeah, it's just it was good character development, and good villains, and all in all, a good introductory story for a new character. And I really got caught up in his the story of Michael Collins, at least as far as the miniseries goes. And I just it definitely made me want to see more of what happened next, and that would be in the ongoing series. But as far as the miniseries goes, it was a good introduction to the character. And even if, say they never did an ongoing series, it would have been a good story. So I'll go ahead and give, the miniseries, 4 out of 5 stars. It was good. Maybe a little cliche at times, what with the corporate villainy, and the change in artwork can be somewhat jarring, but I eventually kind of got used to it, and eventually the artwork sort of the change in artwork kind of complemented the change in tone of the story as well. But yeah, overall, it was a good story, a good miniseries. And real quick, I'll show you all the cover art. So this is, this artwork right here for issue 1. It's painted art by Joe Jusko. And there's Michael Collins right there. And I can see the human flesh body. And then you see the cyborg body, and then you see them combined together as Deathlok. But yeah, Joe Jusko, really good painter. And you have probably my favorite of the covers art. This is my favorite cover for part 2. It's by Bill Sienkiewicz. That guy's always been phenomenal when it came to painting surreal pictures. Good penciler too, but I first came across his stuff when he was working on Moon Knight, and for another character from Marvel Comics. But eventually his work became a lot more abstract, and this is just like another example of it. But I just love this painting. Yeah. And for part 3, you got Kent Williams. In this issue, this is where there's these ants, these robotic ants that the cyber tech has created. But this is what this monster is that's got a hold of him. It's one of the ants. But really good artwork. I love the shading, where Deathlok's face is. Last but not least, issue 4. And this was painted art by Denny's Cowan, who also did the interior art. But yeah, there's Sunfire right there. But yeah, so beautiful artwork, for the covers for all 4 of these issues. And by the way, this miniseries was eventually collected into graphic novel format, and it was called the Deathlok, the Nightmare of Michael Collins, and it also included the segment from this issue of Marvel Comics Presents as well. So if you want, you can get the whole story in one book. But at the time when I was trying to find that particular book, all the prices, they were pretty expensive. I'm sure it's gone down since, at least I hope it has. But, that's where I decided to see if I could find the individual issues, for a good price. And sure enough, I was able to. And I'm very thankful for that because, it was kind of like, a blast from the past for me, because I was more familiar with the character of Michael Collins, Deathlok, as a guest star in other books like, Spider-Man or something like that. But, it was really cool to, actually see where his character guys start. And, I really came to appreciate him as a character, because he was, believable. And, he was a character who was legitimately trying to do the right thing despite dealing with horrible circumstances, that he found himself in. And that's always a good, for me at least, I mean, that's always a character, a type of character that I can get behind and respect. And so I'll definitely be checking out and reviewing the collection that had the first few issues of the ongoing series, and I'll be doing that in the near future too. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, let me know. Y'all have a good night. Bye.